in a quiet park at dusk. In the bitter cold of winter, a homeless man in his 30s rests on a stone bench. Hunger bites at him, until his eyes catch a wallet heavy with cash. He could take it. He could vanish. But instead, he places it back in the hands of its owner, and walks away. The old man, lonely and suspicious, is shaken by what he's seen. And when he decides to follow this stranger, he uncovers a truth that will change both of their lives forever. Before we dive in, imagine finding a wallet filled with cash. Would you keep it or give it back? Share your answer below. By late afternoon, the park looked dipped in honey, all that gold spilling over paths and benches and the slow river sliding past. Wind fussed through the trees and set the last red leaves adrift. A few runners ghosted by, earbuds in, eyes forward. Near the fountain, children chased one another in short bursts of laughter, then vanished with their parents toward the gates. On a far bench, a young man settled deeper into his jacket as if he could hide inside the lining. The zipper had given up months ago and his shoes were surrendering at the toes. He pressed a palm to his stomach when it growled, then laced his fingers together to keep from thinking about food. His name was Jonah Reyes, and lately the park had been the only place that didn't ask him to explain himself. He kept his eyes low, counting the hairline fractures in the pavement like a game. A gust flipped a napkin across the path and he almost smiled at the way it shimmied before snagging on a bench leg. That's when he saw it. Brown leather, the kind that softens with years and money. At first, he thought it was a lunch sack someone forgot, but when the wind nudged it open, a sliver of worn stitching caught the light. A wallet. Jonah glanced around. The runners were gone. The kids were gone. The fountain kept talking to itself. He reached, slowly, like the thing might spook, and felt its weight the second it left the bench. He opened it with careful thumbs. Cash. Not a few bills. Stacks. A fan of crisp cards. A driver's license with a photograph of a man in a neat suit and white hair smoothed back like a wave that never breaks. Jonah counted once. He counted again, hands shaking. His throat tightened. He could taste the corner deli's hot air in memory. The hum of fryers, the punch of coffee, the miracle of a full plate. He closed the wallet and held it between both hands as if pressure could quiet the noise in his head. All the easy roads lit up at once. Motel room. Hot shower. Socks without holes. A phone card to call the last friend who still picked up sometimes. A dent, just a small one, in the hospital bill that swallowed his life after his mother's chemo. The bill that turned the ground under his feet to ice. His mother's voice crossed the distance anyway. Mijo, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, do the right thing. It's what keeps you you. He stood. The movement felt like wading into cold water. He scanned the park. At the far path, a man was patting himself down with the frantic precision of someone who just realized a piece of his life had slipped loose. Coat pockets. Inside jacket. Back pockets. Over and over. He turned in a tight circle, then started pacing like his feet might answer for him. Jonah walked over. "Sir?" he said, and his voice cracked from disuse. The man stopped. His eyes were sharp, guarded. "Yes? Is this yours?" Jonah held out the wallet. The man didn't reach right away. "Where did you—" "On the bench by the river," Jonah said, nodding toward it. "I thought—" The man took it then, quick and careful, and opened it like a safe. He counted with the efficiency of a habit. He checked the cards. He checked the billfold again. His jaw stayed tight. "It's all there," Jonah said, though he hadn't intended to say anything else. "You should keep it safe." There was a flicker. Confusion? Suspicion? In the man's pale eyes. But Jonah had already turned. He didn't want the moment to become anything else. Didn't want the shape of the man's thanks or doubt to stick to him. He walked away, not fast, not slow. Just away. The wind had teeth now. He tucked his chin into his collar and blended back into the park's quiet edges. Behind him, Victor Hale, because that was the name on the license, and the one people spoke with a certain careful respect in tall buildings, stood with his wallet pressed to his chest, as if it were a heartbeat he'd almost lost. Relief should have landed like a stone in a pond. The money was there. The cards were there. The years of walking around with a target painted on his back, always sure someone wanted something, said the rest of this story should have gone a different way. He looked up, searching for the young man. Gone. The crowd at the gates swallowed him easily. Victor exhaled, and it came out tight. Why would he? He murmured and didn't finish. His driver would be waiting. His schedule would be waiting. His empty apartment would be waiting with its quiet that started arguments in his head. He slid the wallet into his inside pocket, the good one, and left the park with the odd feeling that something of value remained behind. In the car, he opened the wallet again and counted what he already knew was counted. The numbers lined up. The facts were intact. But the edges of his thoughts didn't settle. The kid's face, lean, tired, and somehow lit from the inside, wouldn't leave him alone. No request, no angle. Just those 5 words. You should keep it safe. He looked out the window as the city rolled by in gray and gold strips. Since the accident, the world had turned into a museum he walked through alone, touching nothing. Friends peeled off quietly. Colleagues leaned in to see what they could take before they, too, disappeared into other rooms. Trust had become a currency he didn't spend. Home? The driver asked. Victor watched the park recede in the mirror, then said, Not yet. The next afternoon he returned to the same path with the same cane, and a stiffness that wasn't only in his knees. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. He sat, he waited. People flowed around him in the ordinary way people do when the day is fine and they aren't tuned to anyone else's frequency. Then, near the elms, he spotted a figure with that jacket, that posture. Shoulders folded in, not out. The young man sat cross-legged beside a tree with a paper cup in both hands like it deserved respect. A ragged bag rested by his ankle. Victor didn't approach. He watched. The man, Jonah, he would later learn, sipped slowly, warming himself from the inside with cheap coffee. Someone passed. No one stopped. The wind tried to start a conversation with the leaves and gave up. Victor stayed until the air gnawed at his bones. The day after that, he came again. He chose a different bench. He kept his distance. When Jonah appeared, an older woman in a coat 3 sizes too big sat beside him. Her hands trembled in her sleeves. She kept glancing at the half-loaf Jonah pulled from his bag. He noticed. He didn't hesitate. He broke the bread in 2 and offered half. She stared, surprised, then took it with both hands. "Thank you," she whispered. Jonah smiled a small, almost shy smile and ate his share like a person who understands the math of hunger down to the decimal. No performance, no show. Just a quiet habit of decency. Something shifted behind Victor's ribs, like a door long painted shut easing on its hinges. He didn't trust the feeling. He didn't trust much, but the fact of what he had seen, of what he hadn't seen. No ask, no trade, no eyes quick for an angle. Sat there, undeniable, while the drizzle began and the benches emptied and the cold made its point. He stayed longer than he meant to, watching the 2 of them eat under a thinning tree. Somewhere under all his guarded years, a thought rose up, careful and clear. Maybe he'd been wrong about people, or at least about this one. When he finally stood, his decision hadn't formed yet, but it had a shape. He would be back tomorrow. He would sit down beside the young man, not behind him. He would ask one simple question and see where the answer took them. Victor found him again the next afternoon. Same park, same wind combing the water into little silver fingers. Jonah was on a bench near the fountain this time, shoulders tucked in as if the day might bite. He held nothing in his hands, no coffee, no book, just quiet. "Mind if I sit?" Victor asked. Jonah looked up, wary but not unkind. He scooted an inch to the right. "Sure." Victor lowered himself slowly, the cane clicking once against the stone. The fountain whispered behind them. Cars hissed on wet pavement somewhere beyond the trees. They sat like strangers do, facing forward, pretending the silence belonged to the weather. "I owe you something," Victor said finally. "You don't," Jonah replied, eyes on the water. "It wasn't mine." Victor nodded, his jaw working as if the words were heavier than they should be. "You could have kept it." "Could have," Jonah said. But then I'd have to see myself later. Victor turned his head, studying the side of the young man's face, the tired skin, the nick on his jaw, the mouth that looked like it used to smile more than it does now. Respect tugged at him, clean and simple. "Have you eaten today?" Victor asked. Jonah's shoulders lifted, fell. "Not really." "Come on," Victor said, pushing himself up with the cane. "There's a diner down the block." Jonah searched his face for the hook that usually dangles from kind offers. When he didn't find one, he stood. "Okay, but I'm paying you back." "You can buy the second cup of coffee," Victor said. They walked without talking. The neon sign for Margie's blinked twice as they reached the door, as if unsure whether to let them in. Inside, the place was all chrome and memory. Checkered floor, ketchup bottles, a waitress with a pencil stuck in her bun. Heat rose from the grills and wrapped them in a kind of mercy. "Sit wherever you like, honey," the waitress called. They slid into a booth. Victor set his cane beside him and unwound the scarf from his neck. Jonah pressed his hands around the coffee mug when it arrived, letting the warmth seep into his bones before he even took a sip. "Order what you want," Victor said. Jonah picked simple things. Eggs, toast, bacon, like he was trying not to scare the moment away. Victor ordered the same. Silverware clinked. Someone in the corner laughed at something the cook said. The smell of butter and onions turned the air kind. "My name's Victor," he offered. "Jonah," the young man said. "I guess that last week might have been hard," Victor said carefully, returning the wallet. "Hard is a lot of things," Jonah said. "Maybe I'm tired of adding to it." The food arrived. Jonah started slowly, then faster, then slowed again, as if reminding himself to be a person and not a vacuum. Victor watched without comment. He hadn't shared a table with anyone he actually noticed in a long time. It felt strange and almost right. "What did you do before?" Victor asked when the forks finally rested. "Built things," Jonah said, eyes following the rain as it drew soft lines down the window. "Shop floors, assembly lines. I liked it. Parts fit or they didn't. You could tell when something ran smooth because the sound changed. Then the plant downsized and the last of my mom's hospital bills finished the job. Everything slid." "I'm sorry," Victor said. "She used to say the same thing," Jonah murmured, then forced a small smile. "I'm not a charity case." "I didn't ask you to be," Victor said gently. "You gave a stranger his life back for an afternoon." "Thank you" didn't seem like enough. Jonah studied him again, the expensive coat, the careful way he lifted his cup with 2 fingers to hide the tremor in the third, the eyes that looked like they'd had too much money and too little company. He could see the shape of grief, even without the story. "What about you?" he asked. "What's with the cane, the driver, the everything?" "I worked my whole life," Victor said, pushing open a room he hadn't entered in years. "Got very good at building towers and teams and escape plans. Somewhere along the way, I lost the habit of trusting people. Then I lost my wife and daughter. After that, the world kept moving, but I didn't. I checked the locks twice now, on doors. On my face." "I'm sorry," Jonah said, and meant it. The waitress topped off their coffees and slid a plate with 2 pie slices between them. "On the house," she said, and winked like a grandmother who has seen every kind of story pass through her booth. Jonah touched his fork to the crust, then laughed under his breath. "This is ridiculous." "Ridiculously good," Victor said and took a bite. Their shared laugh felt like a bridge laid down plank by plank. "I don't know what you want from me," Jonah said after a while, honest and unadorned. "Right now, nothing," Victor said. "Maybe conversation. Maybe the chance to be decent back. Tomorrow, I don't know. But I want to be the kind of man who at least asks." Jonah let the warmth settle. Pride, that old thin blanket, tried to pull up around his shoulders. He let it sit there, but he didn't smother under it. "Okay, today you're buying lunch. Tomorrow I'll help you carry whatever the cane won't." "Deal," Victor said, small, real, the first version of that expression he'd felt in years. They left the diner slowly. The rain had softened to a mist that made the world look like it was thinking. They walked side by side back toward the park without filling the air, both oddly content to listen to the city breathe. At the gate, Jonah paused. "Thanks," he said. "For what?" "For not making this weird," Jonah said with half a grin. "Also for the pie." "You can pay me back with coffee tomorrow," Victor said. Same bench. Same bench. Jonah nodded. That night, Jonah lay on the narrow cot, hands laced behind his head, replaying the day the way you replay a song that surprises you. The taste of warmth. The sound of a man telling the truth without using it as a weapon. His stomach was full. His guard was not. But it had lowered, a fraction. Across town, Victor stood at his window with the city spread flat and shining. He cupped his palm against the glass like he might test the temperature of a future. The apartment felt less hostile. The cane leaned in the corner like an old dog dozing. He thought about honesty that asks for nothing, about a bench that had become a border crossing. He wasn't sure what he was building yet. He only knew the sound had changed. The machine humming somewhere inside him, not with money or fear, but with something that felt suspiciously like hope. From that day, everything began to shift. The following week, Jonah wasn't waking to the cold bite of morning air on a park bench. He woke instead in a modest apartment Victor quietly arranged, a one-bedroom with clean sheets, a working heater, and a door that locked. It wasn't luxury, but to Jonah, it felt like stepping into another world. He stood there the first night, hand on the doorframe, staring into the room as though he had wandered into someone else's life. Work started Monday, a maintenance position at one of Victor's companies, a factory that still hummed with machines turning raw metal into parts. Jonah worried he'd be treated like a charity case, a stranger dropped into a world he didn't belong to. But the first time he knelt by a stubborn machine and coaxed it back to life, the worry began to fade. The hum shifted into that smooth sound he'd always known meant the gears were aligned. The flow was right. People noticed. At first, the workers eyed him with guarded curiosity. Who was this man with the clean but clearly new uniform? Jonah never carried himself like he was above anyone. He asked questions, listened carefully, offered help when he could. By the third week, the cautious nods turned into greetings. By the end of the month, he was part of the floor. Victor visited often, cane tapping lightly on the concrete as he walked among the machines. At first he stayed back, observing, sharp eyes following Jonah's movements, looking for signs of laziness, arrogance, and angle. He didn't find them. Instead, he saw a man who treated every repair with care, who spoke to others with patience, who never cut corners. Something inside Victor unclenched. One evening, after a long day, Victor insisted on driving Jonah home. They stopped at the diner on the way. Same booth, same waitress, same smell of coffee and fried food, but this time, Jonah sat straighter, his clothes clean, his eyes brighter. "You've settled in," Victor said, stirring his coffee slowly. "Trying to," Jonah replied. "Feels strange. Having a bed, a place to come back to. I keep expecting someone to knock on the door and tell me it's a mistake." "It's no mistake," Victor said. "You've earned this." "I don't know about earned," Jonah said, laughing softly. "More like borrowed." "Then consider it a loan," Victor replied. "One you're already paying back, with the way you live." As weeks passed, their conversations grew longer. Small things, oil on the factory floor, old books from a free bin, the way autumn light slants across the city, and sometimes heavier things. Jonah spoke about his mother, her laugh, her strength, her line. "Even if the world takes everything, don't let it take your kindness." His voice cracked when he said it, but he didn't look away. Victor shared fragments of his own story. His wife, who kept blankets in the trunk for winter nights. His daughter, who once insisted on donating her birthday money to a shelter. He hadn't spoken their names out loud in years. It hurt, but not like he feared. More like letting air back into a sealed room. One evening, Victor invited Jonah to his home, a penthouse high above the city, glass walls opening onto the skyline. For years, the rooms had been silent, echoes of footsteps the only company. That night, Jonah sat at the long dining table, awkward at first, then slowly easing into the rhythm of shared food and conversation. "This house hasn't heard real voices in too long," Victor admitted, almost shy. "It doesn't feel empty tonight," Jonah said. Something in Victor's chest loosened. For the first time since the accident, the place felt less like a museum of loss and more like a home. Months passed. Jonah's shoulders straightened. Color returned to his face. He carried himself with quiet confidence again, not the man curled on a park bench, invisible to the world. Yet he never acted as though he'd risen above anyone. He still arrived early, stayed late, offered a hand when someone struggled. Victor noticed. More than that, he cherished it. The truth grew louder in his chest each day. This young man had given him back something he thought was gone forever. Not wealth, not success, but the ability to believe in people again. On a crisp autumn afternoon, almost a year after the day a wallet changed hands, Victor asked Jonah to meet him at Riverside Park. They sat on the same bench where it began. The fountain whispered. Children laughed. Leaves fell in amber spirals. "This is where it started," Victor said quietly. "You handed me my wallet. Every dollar still inside. You could have walked away. No one would have blamed you. But you didn't." "It was just the right thing to do," Jonah said, lowering his gaze. "Since then," Victor went on, gripping the head of his cane to steady his voice, "you've shown me something I thought I'd lost forever. Trust, kindness, a reason to believe again. I've been alone for too long. I don't want to leave this world with nothing but empty rooms and silent halls. If you're willing, I'd like to call you my son." Jonah's breath caught. He stared at the man beside him, the billionaire he had once feared, now speaking like a father asking for something fragile and priceless. I don't know what to say," Jonah whispered. "Say yes," Victor said softly, a smile breaking through years of guarded walls. "That's all." Jonah covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking. When he lowered them, his eyes were wet. "Yes," he said, voice breaking. "I would be honored." Victor placed a firm hand on Jonah's shoulder. Small gesture, heavy meaning. The sun broke through the clouds and warmed the ground at their feet. Two lives, once broken in separate ways, joined again on the bench where it began. From that day forward, everything changed. Quietly at first, like a tide slipping in when no one's looking. Jonah moved through his days with a steadiness he hadn't known since before the layoffs, before the hospital bills, before the park benches. He worked with purpose, hands sure on tools, voice calm with the crew. And when his shift ended, he went home to a small apartment that no longer felt borrowed but lived in. He kept a small plant on the windowsill, a stubborn green thing thriving on the same second chance he'd been given. Victor, too, changed. The penthouse still echoed some nights. Grief never leaves entirely, but it was no longer unbearable. He had someone to check on, someone to share meals with, someone to call family. Towers of glass and steel had never filled the emptiness. A simple dinner at the diner with Jonah meant more than any deal he'd ever signed. They built routines. On Sundays, they walked through Riverside Park, the place where fate crossed their paths. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. The act of walking side by side was enough. At the diner, they traded stories. Victor learning more about Jonah's mother, Jonah hearing about Victor's daughter and the doodles she left in the margins of his work papers. Those stories stitched something between them that went deeper than gratitude and obligation. One crisp evening, Jonah stopped by Victor's office, grease smudged on his sleeves. He hovered in the doorway until Victor looked up. "I just wanted to say thanks," Jonah said, "for everything. The job, the place, the chance. But more than that, for trusting me when you didn't have to." "You earned that trust," Victor said, steady. "From the moment you handed me back my wallet, you proved something. Not about me, not about money, about you. You had nothing, and still you chose honesty." Jonah didn't argue. He just nodded. Winter settled in with sharp winds and glittering nights. On Christmas Eve, Victor invited Jonah over. The penthouse glowed with lights for the first time in years. A small tree stood by the window, branches strung with simple ornaments. They ate together, not in silence but in easy conversation that filled the spaces where loneliness once lived. "To family, however it finds us," Victor said, lifting his glass. "To family," Jonah echoed. voice low but firm. Family, they learned, wasn't only blood. Sometimes it was the person who handed back your wallet when they could have walked away. Sometimes it was the one who offered you a job when the world turned its back. Family was built in choices, in kindness, in trust, freely given. Years passed. Jonah rose steadily at the company, proving himself not just as a worker, but as someone others could rely on. Victor's health slowed him, but he never stopped showing up on the factory floor, cane tapping, eyes proud when he watched Jonah at work. They became known not as the billionaire and the drifter, but as father and son, the kind of family you'd never guess from the outside, but that everyone around them could feel. On a spring morning years later, they sat again on the same bench in Riverside Park. Children's laughter drifted on the breeze. The fountain sparkled in the sunlight. "This is where it started," Jonah said, a smile tugging at his lips. "A lost wallet," Victor chuckled. "Who would have thought?" "Not lost," Jonah said, eyes warm. "Just waiting for the right hands to find it." Victor rested one hand on his cane, the other on Jonah's shoulder. "And I did," he said quietly. They stayed as the afternoon stretched, two men who had found not just second chances, but something greater, a place to belong, a reason to trust again, a family built from nothing more than honesty and kindness. And when the sun slipped low and painted the park in gold, they rose together, no longer alone, no longer broken, just father and son walking side by side toward whatever tomorrow would bring.